for me, it was every time I finished watching the Harry Potter series, I'd get like sad and depressed because I'm like, my world is so much more boring than this. And like, I'm not the chosen one, and I don't have a wand. I mean, I got a wand, but like, it's not that magic.
This is smooth brain, man.
Based off like what I'm listening to in music right now, I'm kind of just on a bunch of different artists right now. I'm kind of enjoying it all. But once I find that one song that really hits for me, I'm going to start honing in on that artist, whether it's Freddie Gibbs or Pusha T, or for me, most recently, I went on like this huge Dominik Fike kick, and I had a really good time, and his songs brought me so much dopamine until I listened to them too much and there was diminishing returns.
Yeah.
But I was so like, all my dopamine receptors in terms of music were like hooked up to his music, that when there was diminishing returns, the switch back to other people's music wasn't easy.
Was other people's music you'd already heard? Or is it new music from other people?
There was some new music and definitely artists that I liked and knew of, but I just wasn't. And they had songs that I hadn't heard or albums that I was planning on listening to, but I never had gotten to. But it just didn't bring me the same dopamine.
I feel like this almost goes back to a few episodes ago with the novelty conversation. I'm like, Dominik Fike, I feel like just provided you extreme novelty for a little bit. Because it's like, oh, I watched this dude in a show, and he's cool in the show, and he also makes music, and his music's actually pretty dope, and like, this is pretty cool. So like, there's a super high novelty value there for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then once the novelty wears off, it's like, But then you're then comparing other artists where it's like the starting novelty value is not that high. They're not in a show. You don't know their personality. You don't know like these other background factors that are influencing how you think about their music.
And it's also just like, it also goes back to the rabbit hole conversation. I got so far down the rabbit hole though, that it's like to get back into like the general room I was before, where I was sampling all these different artists. It's a lot of effort, and it's kind of like mental training. And I have to like deprive myself of dopamine for a bit to kind of get back into like a more centered place.
Do you think meditation would be helpful for that?
Yeah, I think meditation will keep you from obsessing too much on one rabbit hole. And it kind of keeps you always in a centered place. Not saying you can't go down like extreme routes of focus, but like going back into where you were before would be easy, I'd say. And I think this applies to so much more than just music. So yeah.
I hope somebody, if not like me or us, makes a company like that one day where the dedicated goal is to be like helping people get themselves back to like a neutral ground in their own brain.
Wow.
Because it is pretty fun to look out. Like, yeah, it's like when you're trying to break into that other music, like you sort of need to bring yourself back to like your centered spot and be like, okay, like I'm back to my little status quo, and now everything kind of sounds good again. I can find a new direction. But getting back there on your own is like not very easy.
Yeah. And I think it's also super important to point out or note that like this isn't just like getting back to, oh, I liked this music back then, I want to be back to there, because taste is always going to evolve. But I feel like we're walking down like one very straight hallway in life, and maybe it's not straight, but like it's a wider hallway, and then we go through a bunch of rooms and doors and things like that, and that doesn't always lead us to like this nice wide hallway. It leads us to a little room, which is nice, and you got to get out of the room.
Yeah.
So your music taste is going to change, your taste is going to change, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're still centered in that and you're still willing to try new things within the bounds of that.
Is that almost what float tanks are trying to do? Because like a float tank does feel like a bit of a reset, where you have a float tank and like then you can go down like a new hallway like that. Like you're not in a hallway when you're in a float tank. You're in a very open room that has all the hallways around the edges of it. And it's like you don't really know where you came from. You don't know where you're going to go out and like what hallway you're going to go down at the end of it.
I feel like it's an ungrooving device. Like I feel like nature's ungrooving, float tanks, meditation, even like eating vegetables for me, like at least food wise, like it resets the palate.
I think anything very outside the norm. Like when I was thinking of like, oh, what would reset my music taste? My first initial thought was going into one of those silent rooms where like they build those insane like 0 decibel rooms.
Yeah.
Like that would be, I feel like enough of a different experience where my brain would exit that experience in a different hallway. Like, so I feel like eating a vegetable, it's like, if that's not something you normally do, that very well could be almost a reset.
Yeah. Going on your hallway, I think of it like trails. And when you walk down a trail and you get to a waterfall, you're like, this is great. And eventually you're like, okay, I'm ready to go somewhere new. I can't stare at this waterfall forever. And when you walk all the way back to the trailhead to try to pick another trail, you're basically like coming down. And it's really hard to pick a new trail and start on it without the chemicals to be like, you need like breadcrumbs of dopamine to slowly roll into getting down the path. Mm-hmm. So if you get back to the head of the trail and you're trying to pick another one and you feel like, it's impossible to enjoy the first step.
Yeah.
Like when I listen to a new album, it almost just like goes straight over my head. And I'm like, I can't get into it.
It always takes a second. Yeah, it always takes like a listen or two for me. That trail analogy is really good because when you're hiking, like when we're in the Tetons, there were so many offshoots on the main Cascade Canyon trail and you could have gone down all of them, but you would have been exhausted by the end of the day. Or you go down one, you get to the site, there is a seat, and the trail doesn't shoot past that, so you have to go back. And then it's diminishing returns because, I've already experienced this part of the trail, but I'm going to get back to the trailhead, and then the dopamine will come back after a bit.
Yeah. But it's interesting to think about, how do you cultivate a mind that's willing to pick from a bunch of possibilities? Because not every mind state is capable of doing that.
And I think that's where a lot of value lies. Being able to choose a different path. And, well, there's pros and there's cons. I guess you don't always want to be choosing a different path and not committed to any one thing ever. But I think it's generally, I would just say, more fun to be able to go down a lot of different hallways, which is, I feel like, valuable in its own way.
And the company that you're talking about, I feel like would be most useful for very highly motivated people who like got all the way to the waterfall, really enjoyed it, and they're having trouble picking a new trail. You could be like, hey, let me get you to where you're completely ready to look at the possibilities. And then,
or especially to reconnecting with an energy that you used to have, or like this other path that you're like, oh, that was a really good path. I just happened to deviate from it because this other path, was an opportunity and I went down that path. But that you sort of lose sight of what that other thing was. Yeah. Like when I was in my mode of not working and trying to be like, very open future, a lot of different things. Like I would put a bunch of thought into stuff that I feel like was valuable thought that I just don't do anymore because I'm just not in that hallway anymore. I'm in a hallway that's like, fairly narrow. And I would need to get myself back to a very big room to figure out or find another kind of way of thinking.
I get super paralyzed in a big room.
Interesting.
Like the fear of the Descartes says that anxiety is the dizziness of fear or freedom. So the fact that when I have too many possibilities, I don't do anything. Where when I have very few possibilities, I feel like free because it's so simple. The two options, at any given point, I'm only down a couple paths.
Freedom is very like anxiety inducing at times. Sometimes I can really enjoy it, and other times I'm like, it's just like looking at your future and being like, I have no idea, and it's so mysterious.
I think when you can really truly look at it, it's pleasant. But when you're grabbing onto some agreements you've made with yourself and looking at all the freedom that you have, you're like, then it gets stressful.
I think it goes back to almost our brain's natural way of thinking about stuff too. Because when you are free, you probably weigh the negatives too heavily when you're thinking about the possible outcomes, which is just normal. Like this is something that like a golf coach taught me like way, way, way back in the day, where they're like, yeah, in terms of the mental game of playing golf, they did some study where like, yeah, it's like it basically takes 20 good shots to use up as much brain space and create as much of a positive feedback loop as it does one shot negative to make a really bad negative feedback loop. So it's like you weigh the negative stuff way heavier because there's like a material consequence in the moment, where hitting one good shot is cool, but that one good shot doesn't get you to your goal. But one bad shot might completely take you away from your goal. So you like naturally weigh the bad stuff way heavier. And when you're free, I feel like you might naturally be weighing like, my future could go wrong in all these different ways. And it is hard to figure out a way to be like, no, it's exciting and fun that there's all these possibilities.
The mental training of that confidence and that like assuredness is such like a fragile tower. Or I don't even know if like a fragile like stack maybe.
Yeah. Well, that was another thing too. Is like you can hit 20 good shots and then hit one bad shot and undo all the mental like build up. Yeah. That you did for those last 20 good shots.
Yeah. And there's probably a way to make that tower stronger. And there's ways to train your brain to not let that bad shot like just bring you down.
Yeah.
But it's training in itself too. That's going to take time and effort.
Yeah. Because it's biological that we weigh the bad because it's so much worse for us, you know?
Yeah. Just as like monkeys, like we're just like, don't die. Like, yeah, you can get like 50 bananas, but if you're going to die, it's not fucking worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's better to keep an eye on the lion than it is to like be like, whoa, but look at all the bananas over there. It's like, no, there's a tiger. It's going to eat me.
The lion in the jungle, dude.
Yeah, that's a bit of an oopsie.
Get all the nanners, brother.
It is an interesting skill though to hone protecting the tower. Because if you look at how neurons form habits, it's way harder to build the positive neurons than the negative. So it's good to go really slow and make sure that like each step is a win.
Yeah, like when they're in baseball, it's a really big thing. The Padres, they have this new pitcher who was a top prospect, Mackenzie Gore, and they're very carefully putting him in scenarios where he's going to do well. So they didn't bring him up to the majors until this year because they could have, but they wanted to give him time. They want to give him playing time, slowly build that confidence up. And to the point, now they're putting him in games in certain scenarios where like he's going to see success here and he's going to be able to build that tower and build that confidence. And with like pitchers in specific, it's super important to have a short-term memory. So if you do fuck up and if someone hits a dinger off you, you're able to get back and focus and try to throw a strike the next pitch.
Yeah, the physical one's a really good way to feel like draw it back to something understandable. I feel like everybody can relate to that in some sense where it's like, yeah, it's really easy to get in your head about physical stuff.
Like surfing, golf, or baseball.
Yeah. But it definitely works the same way in every other aspect of your life. It's just you don't think about it as much because nobody kind of talks about it in that context.
It prevents flow too. Like, because I imagine hitting a golf ball well you hit it the best when you're just doing it. You're not thinking like
100%.
what part to do.
Yeah.
Because it makes it too mechanical.
Yeah, it's a flow state thing. You just need to be feeling it. Like once you learn and get good at golf, like in the beginning, a lot of it's technical and learning specific movements and sort of understanding it. But once you get to a certain level, it is really about just being like, I just need to hit the shot. Just be confident that the ball is going to do what I want it to, and it'll go do that.
Yeah. That's why some people play drunk, right? Because it helps loosen them up.
That's why freaking John Daley slammed 3 bottles of I think cognac or something and then beat Tiger Woods in a tournament.
That's why he did it. Not because he's an alcoholic.
Not because he's an alcoholic, because it loosened him up, dude. Got him loosey-goosey.
I was kind of like that with getting the ladies back in the day because I always found it super weird. I'm like, it all happens at once. Like there's a drought of getting the ladies and then it's like there's a bunch of options available. And that's really just the buildup of my confidence and being able to talk to people and get out of my comfort zone. And then since that goes in waves, so does corresponding ladies.
And it's cool that when you have one option, it like lowers your stress. So you get flowier and then you get more options. It's like a very like snowball either way.
Yeah, but then Icarus gets involved in that because then I get too confident and like I'm gonna try something wild now. And like I'm in class and I'll try to I would try to flirt and I'd say something. I'm like, oh, that was awkward. And I'm like, now I'm thinking about it and the whole tower topples.
Right, and you snowball the other direction.
Yeah.
Is the only way to not get the tower to topple to convince yourself that there is learning opportunities and stuff?
Yeah.
Because that's like how it is in golf. It's like if you're gonna hit a bad shot, don't think about the fact you hit a bad shot. Like think about like, okay, I hit that bad shot because I did this, and like you're learning something from it.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you can kind of stay on the flow. Cause it's like, okay, that was like a speed bump, but I still know the path I'm on and actually have more information about it now.
Yeah, because in reality, we're not flying with mechanical wings and glued feathers. Like just because you get too close to the sun doesn't mean you have to topple.
Yeah.
But our brains are trained to think that way.
It's almost like you're not getting too close to the sun. It's like you're getting close enough to the sun for the sun to be like getting pretty close, dude. And then you're like, okay, you're right. Like I'm going to back off a little bit so I don't get too close.
Well, you could get too close to the sun.
Well, but
that's usually you're doing something really wild and irreversible, and that's not good.
Yeah.
You can almost look at the three angles of it is, did you physically get too close to the sun? Like, did you get hit by a car? Okay, well, that was, too close.
Yeah.
Then there's like a skill where it's like, oh, you went out of your skill, you fucked up the shot, bring it back and you'll get the shot. Like, you'll be in a manageable range. And then there's the mental where it's like, you can really spiral out mentally, or you can go, oh, I biffed that pickup line, but it's all good. Like, I just won't do that again.
Yeah, I'll take it back one step rather than take it back 20 steps and reassess my life.
Right. Where you see some people, like, they topple some chips off the top of their tower, and then they just keep kicking out chips until they get lower and lower and lower, and then they start going negative, and you're like, that's how you get crazy people.
Yeah.
You start self-deprecating at a point, because there's a difference between like recognizing your failure and just being like, well, I fucking suck now.
Yeah. The mental, I feel like a good analogy is with athletes at a young age is if you are one of the oldest people in your grade and you grow quickly and they put you on a team where you're the best, now you're like, okay, I rip at this. So you get better coaching and you are like, you enjoy it. So you keep practicing, and that's how you get to be really good. Where other kids will be like, oh, if they're like the run of the litter, they think, oh, I'm bad at this. And then they never do anything athletic and they go into some other field. And then when you ask them like, hey, you want to go to the gym? They're like, oh, nah, like I'm not a gym, like I'm not an athletic person. It's like, well, everyone's an athletic person. You probably just had experiences that bummed you out.
Yeah. And a lot of the players that are like the super scrappy, hardworking guys, they got to the league because they were the runt, but they continued to keep on pushing through. And that became such like a big character builder for them. But so many of those scrappy guys were that runt, which is interesting to think about.
Yeah, because then it highlights the value of
hard work
and pushing past, instead of going, oh, I'm bad at this, I give up, I'm going to fear it and never get near it. It's like, oh no, I just need to work harder. And that mindset is like, ooh, now you got a real winner on your hands, especially if they grow into themselves.
Yeah. Fear it and never get near it, dude. Nice.
What do you mean?
You rhymed.
Oh, I didn't even see
Congratulations.
Dude, fear is... Dune fucking done did it. Because fear's really the thing.
Fear's the mind killer, the little death that brings total obliteration.
It's the only thing I feel like they really left out of the Four Agreements. Like if you take the first chapter of Dune, smash it into the Four Agreements, you got yourself a serious philosophy.
Because it does portray fear in a way where it's like, if you fear nothing, then literally the universe will just bring the best possible outcome. Where do you lie on that being the reality of things? Because there's a way of thinking where I can see that being the reality essentially, but there's also a version of not fearing anything that I don't necessarily think is a good thing.
I don't think Dune exactly promoted that though. It was more talking about the fear freezing your mind, turning you towards indecision. That was the big thing with this. I forgot the second half of the saying, but it's all about movement, basically.
Well, so do you feel like the movie in a way kind of fucked it up? Because that's how I took it from the movie, because Timothée Chalamet was like, oh, I'm not going to fear it. And he's flying this helicopter through the sandstorm and literally just sat back and like didn't touch anything and just like let it happen. And then everything was perfect.
Yeah, I mean, he's the chosen one, so we have to like keep that in mind for sure.
Yeah.
And he has like foresight, so that I think that also plays into it. But yeah, I mean, you can't just go willy nilly with it, you know. Like you can get too close to the sun at a point and be like, okay, man, we're supposed to like not fear, but like fear is still like a healthy thing. You know?
Yeah. Dude, now you got me thinking about Star Wars. This is a thought I've had for a while. It's cool that like they do like meditation and like clear all their chakras and shit, but it's just such a bummer we don't get the Force in real life. You know what I mean?
That always upset me as a kid, and I think it's the reason why I was depressed for such a long time.
That's really real though. As a kid, whatever you read or whatever your big influence is, if there's some form of magic in there where it's like, hey, if you just think hard enough and really want it bad enough, like it'll just happen. Like I remember that with the Eragon books of like their little, whatever their powers was. Like it wasn't a very serious power, but it was enough to like influence reality a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, like that would be like, that's like the best.
For me, it was every time I finished watching the Harry Potter series, I'd get like sad and depressed because I'm like, my world is so much more boring than this. And like, I'm not the chosen one. And I don't have a wand. I mean, I got a wand, but like, it's not that magic.
You can't wave and get anything you want, you know?
But yeah, and I feel like there's almost, I mean, it's not a bad thing. They're making movies with the chosen one and all that. And that's kind of like a very common theme. It's just important to understand that like, you're not that important. Maybe, and you should be important to your own story, but like, you're not the chosen one in society.
I think that's ultimately why it's just so interesting to watch them as a kid. Cause I feel like the people who are writing those stories know that like that is a really interesting storyline, that it's like, wow, like you could be a chosen one and be that special and have like powers and really control the whole world around you. Like that's the dream. I think it's the control thing that attracts kids. Yeah. Because the world is so out of their control that having a causal influence on it in a perceivable way that you can understand is like pretty enticing.
Yeah, and it's more than just kids. I still watch those Harry Potter movies with that same thought. I'm like, wow, that'd be really cool if I can do that.
Yeah.
It's definitely a metaphor for controlling your perception. Because like the way you perceive the world and what you focus on does affect it. Like you're not getting the, I fucking moved it with my mind. It's like, no,
Leviosa, dude.
Yeah. So it's like a little disappointing that it's not as exciting.
Yeah.
But there are some parts of our life that are way more exciting. It's just, harder to. I can't even say that. It's not as cool as magic, dude.
No, it's not as cool as magic. There's like, I don't know if anything in my life is as exciting as what it is in like Harry Potter and Eragon. And
I never saw anybody get any pussy in Harry Potter. That's all I got.
But they're getting pussy in the background. You know they're getting pussy in the background.
Those bathrooms, bro.
And they're getting that magic pussy.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
They're casting spells.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
There's probably some like bedroom spells.
Looking back to the main character thing, it is 2048 Blade Runner. That one got me. I was definitely like,
What's the premise on? I've seen the movie. It's been a while. We're talking the one with Gosling, right?
Yeah, like 70 or 80% of the movie, you think like, oh, we're following the guy who's gonna like free the entire world, and then he realizes, oh no, I'm just meant to like basically unlock a door for the person who's gonna free the world. That's a tough realization.
That was a tough one.
Yeah.
Just dying on the concrete.
He so wholeheartedly was like, I'm the one, and then had to like sit with the fact like, oh shit, I'm not the one.
And it's like an ends over mean things too, because he was programmed to think that way by the good guys. And it's kind of fucked up by the good guys, but it was like the only way they were able to like get people to do that is by them believing that they're the chosen one. Because if you don't believe you're the chosen one, then you're not gonna go and try to change the world.
Yeah.
Which maybe is a metaphor in itself, because maybe you should believe you're important and you should believe that you have the ability to make an impact. And that's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I kind of think that is the theme, because if you think that you're going to make that impact, you'll probably make the biggest impact you possibly can, even if that doesn't mean you're the final impact that like really does the thing.
Yeah, and he was the chosen one in that, right?
Exactly. He did save the world. That's what's so cool. It's just like, he's not going to get any credit for it. Like Steve Jobs' mom doesn't get any credit, but like she could have definitely killed Steve Jobs when he was like 1 to 4. Yeah. Just like, oops, I left him in the car. He's dead now.
Or even the way that, she raised him. It's like, in a way, there's a lot of responsibility outside of Steve Jobs that, makes up for who he is. But he needed to believe that he is the reason that he is what he is to be that thing.
And that's probably why we should all be proud of our achievements, no matter how small they are, because those are little stepping stones, and just helping out your friends with one thing or another. Like that's just... It might lead to something monumental, or it might just be this small thing, but you should like appreciate it all the same.
Your belief in other people is like wildly valuable.
This is smooth.